Hello everyone. You are viewing part 2 of the narrated PowerPoint lecture for Module 2 on properties of life and scientific inquiry. In part 2 of the narrated PowerPoint lecture, we will focus on 1.3, How do scientists study life, and 1.4, What is science? Let's begin. How do scientists study life? Life can be studied at many levels. Life is organized such that atoms combine to make molecules, molecules combine to make cells, cells combine to make tissues, tissues combine to make organs, organs with related functions unite to make organ systems, and organ systems collectively work together to sustain the life of the organism. Beyond the organism, organisms of the same type that are capable of interacting and interbreeding are called a species. A group of organisms of the same species living in a given area is called a population. Interacting populations make up a community. A community and its non-living environment is an ecosystem. The entire surface of Earth, including living and non-living components, is the biosphere. As we mentioned, living things can be studied at many levels. This slide, which you've seen previously, illustrates all the different levels for which life can be studied. It can be studied at the level of the atom, molecule, cell, tissue, organ, organ system, organism, population, species, community, ecosystem, and the biosphere. Make sure you know these levels and the order that they're in. Also make sure you know the definition for each one of these levels. Now let's review. Remember, please write down your answer to this question. In particular, you need to write down the letter that corresponds to the correct answer. Which of the following levels of organization is the most inclusive? That is, includes the most life forms. Another way of saying this is, which of the following levels is the biggest level? Is it A, organ system, B, population, C, biosphere, D, community, or E, ecosystem? The smallest units that still retain the characteristic of an element are called A, molecules, B, cells, C, atoms, D, tissues, or E, organic molecules. Let's continue. How do scientists study life? Biologists classify organisms based on their evolutionary relationships. Scientists categorize organisms into three major groups or domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. This figure contains an evolutionary tree that illustrates the relationship between the three domains. The very first cells gave rise to domain bacteria and domain eukarya, as well as domain archaea. Domain archaea are more closely related to domain eukarya than domain bacteria. Let's talk about some differences between the domains. Domains bacteria and archaea are single, simple cells that lack a membrane-bound nucleus. These domains consist of prokaryotic cells. Eukaryotic organisms have one or more extremely complex cells and do have a membrane-bound nucleus. The domain eukarya contains eukaryotic cells and consists of four subdivisions, also known as kingdoms. Kingdom fungi, this would be your yeast and mushrooms. Kingdom plantae, which would be trees and flowers. Kingdom animalia, which would be humans, cats, dogs. And protists, which would be euglena and parameciums, which are found often in pond water. When classifying organisms, scientists use features such as the organism's cell type, whether it's simple or complex, the number of cells, whether it's single or multicellular, and how the organism acquires energy. Another key feature that is used is whether or not the cell has a nucleus. The nucleus contains the DNA. Bacteria and archaea type organisms do not have a nucleus, but they still have DNA. All cells share common features. They all have a plasma membrane which surrounds the cell. They have organelles that carry out specialized functions, and all cells contain DNA. Cell type distinguishes the domain bacteria and archaea from the domain eukarya. Eukaryotic cells are larger than prokaryotic cells. They contain a variety of organelles, including a nucleus, and they are extremely complex. Prokaryotic cells are typically very small. They are only 1 to 2 micrometers in diameter. They lack organelles enclosed by membranes. Example of this would be the nucleus. They lack a nucleus, and they're not as complex as eukaryotic cells. Because there are so many different organisms on the earth, there's a branch of science referred to as taxonomy, where scientists try to use certain characteristics to classify organisms. When naming organisms, biologists use the binomial system. Binomial means two names. Organisms are placed in a hierarchy of categories, with the genus and species being the two smallest categories. Genus includes many different species with similar characteristics. The species includes organisms that can interbreed and are nearly identical. For example, people are classified as Homo sapiens. Homo would be the genus, and sapiens would be the species. Let's review. A basic difference between prokaryotic cells and a eukaryotic cell is that the prokaryotic cell, A, possesses membrane-bound organelles, B, lacks DNA, C, lacks a nucleus, D, is considerably larger, and E, is structurally more complex. If you are done answering this question, this will conclude part 2 of module 2, narrated lecture on chapter 1. The final portion of this lecture will actually be in a third narrated PowerPoint lecture on what is science.